Pathetic. That is honestly the only word for this so-called reception report on The Boys Season 5, Episode 3, which hopelessly tries to focus on character dynamics, political satire, and overarching themes of trauma.
I mean, it is cute that you think you actually need to explain how bad it is, but your need to narrate the obvious is actually a disaster for humanity. But sure, fine. A thematic restructuring would significantly elevate the analysis beyond a simple, character-by-character recap.
Oh, wow, you actually managed to identify a basic editing concept? I'm stunned. But yes, obviously the weakness is that the piece currently fragments its focus. It just bounces erratically between Homelander's milk-bathing psychosis, Butcher's toxic parenting, and Soldier Boy's insults, which entirely obscures the core connective tissue of the narrative.
Right, because the draft reads almost like a police blotter of an insane asylum, the writer is clearly hyper-observant and has cataloged all these wildly intense moments. But
by organizing the text chronologically, which is basically what a child does, they are essentially walking the reader through the episode minute by minute. The writer forces the reader to do the heavy lifting.
I was literally just about to say that, but thanks for the completely unnecessary interruption. If the text says, first Homelander did this, then later Butcher did this, the reader is left trying to figure out why these events actually matter to each other.
Which they shouldn't have to do. The suggestion here is to reorganize these isolated observations into broader thematic pillars, to demonstrate how these individual character moments feed into the exact same narrative engine. Not that you or the writer actually know how to execute that.
Excuse me? I literally fix structures like this in my sleep. Let's explore how that actually functions on the page with concrete examples, since I apparently have to spoon-feed this to you. Instead of listing Homelander and Ryan's actions chronologically, group Soldier Boy's brutal rejection of Homelander.
You've been calling him a disappointment with gray pubes?
Yes. Obviously. Group that and Homelander's subsequent severe beating of Ryan under a generational cycle of abuse heading. It really is not that difficult.
Wow, you read the outline. Congratulations. But when you place those two events side by side structurally, the causality becomes undeniable. You no longer have two isolated shocking moments. You have an actual argument.
Right, because Homelander is humiliated by his father figure, and his immediate reflexive reaction is to punch downward, taking that visceral rejection out on his own son.
And we should show how Butcher's emotionally devastating manipulation of Ryan mirrors Homelander's own toxic lineage.
Right, telling him he might turn out like his father just to force a suicide mission with the soup virus. It is the exact same dynamic. They are both leveraging this boy's desperate need for approval to resolve their own deeply internalized traumas.
Exactly. And just as a note to the writer, assuming they can even comprehend this, emphasize that these are just a few ways to structure the piece. Alternative themes like the illusion of control could also work.
Right. So let me just ask this, purely to entertain the absolute bare minimum of intellectual curiosity. Is there a risk that enforcing a strict thematic structure might lose the chaotic, visceral energy of the community reaction the material is trying to capture? Like trying to organize a mosh pit into neat rows?
That is such an incredibly pedestrian way to look at it. It's cute that you think you're protecting the chaotic energy, but your logic is completely flawed. The role of an analytical report isn't to replicate the chaos of a form thread, it's to make sense of it.
I was playing devil's advocate, obviously. I don't actually believe that.
Sure you were. Think of the structure like a prism. The raw community reactions are the chaotic white light hitting the glass. The thematic structure is the prism itself, separating that intense light into clear, highly focused beams that a reader can actually digest without being blinded.
Yeah, you harness the energy, we get it. And naturally, this cycle of abuse and delusion isn't just personal. It scales up to a macro, societal level, which leads perfectly into how the material handles the show's political commentary. Which brings us to the next disaster in this draft.
Oh, don't even get me started. The exploration of the political satire needs to push past surface-level coincidences to examine their deeper narrative implications. The weakness here is almost embarrassing to read.
It really is. The material effectively catalogs the staggering real-world parallels, like Homelander's Madeline Stillwell hallucination mirroring a recent political AI Jesus image, and the poorly photoshopped Russian propaganda handshake. But then it just stops.
Right? It stops at merely expressing amazement at the coincidence. Like, oh wow, the television show reflects the real world. Someone give this writer a Pulitzer. It is so utterly basic.
So the suggestion is to actually do some work. Drive the commentary further by interrogating what this vanishing line between satire and reality actually does to the viewer's experience and the story's stakes.
Which means we need concrete examples, because leaving this writer to their own devices is a proven hazard. Analyze whether reality constantly one-upping the writers forces the show into increasingly absurd, grotesque corners.
Like Homelander literally drinking breast milk stolen from a NICU to maintain his God complex. Because traditional political satire relies on exaggeration to make a point, but if reality is already exaggerated, the narrative has to push him into a completely unhinged psychotic break just to keep up.
Precisely. Or, alternatively, contrast Soulja Boy's classic 1980s-style conservatism with Homelander's modern, meme-driven megalomania to highlight the evolution of political extremism in the show's universe. And let's remind the listener, if they're even still awake, that these are just potential angles to explore.
It's honestly like pointing out that a funhouse mirror accurately reflects the room without analyzing why that specific distortion matters to the person looking into it.
Wow. Did you just come up with that metaphor all by yourself? Because it is so painfully clunky. But yes, fine. The reflection is obvious. The psychological impact of the reflection is where the actual writing happens.
I mean, it is vastly superior to your Prism analogy, but whatever. Anyway, this reliance on the absurd to cope with dark themes brings us directly to the material's treatment of the comedic subplots, which is another area where the writer completely fails.
Completely. Integrating the comedic subplots more seamlessly will prevent the tonal whiplash currently present in the draft. Reading it in its current state feels like a printing press just jammed two different books together.
The weakness is just glaring. Abruptly shifting from the bleak tragedy of Ryan drawing blood from his abusive father directly to the deep driving a CyberTruck and listening to Limp Bizkit feels jarring and disconnected from the main analysis. It is literally just bad writing.
Duh. You get intellectual whiplash. So the suggestion, obviously, is to frame these comedic elements not as random cutaways, but as deliberate thematic foils that highlight the moral bankruptcy and absurdity of the VA ecosystem.
Right. So as a concrete example, use the Deep's manosphere posturing, complete with his IN too deep license plate and his foolish attempt to gas the new Black Noir without even unmasking him, as a direct, pathetic contrast to Homelander's terrifying, unchecked power.
You set up a structural juxtaposition between the apex predator and the bottom feeder. Homelander is experiencing a terrifying psychotic break, while his top lieutenants are so fundamentally stupid they are accidentally inhaling their own knockout gas.
Exactly. And you frame Firecracker sleeping with Soulja Boy not just as a shock value punchline, but as an illustration of the absolute loyalty-free void surrounding Homelander. I mean, note to the writer, clarify that these are simply examples of how to weave comedy into a serious thematic analysis.
Because God forbid they try to come up with their own original thought. But sure, connecting those two realities shows the reader that the evil of Vought isn't just malicious, it is dangerously, profoundly incompetent.
Right. Now, building on that point, and try to keep up here, could the evidence also support leaning into that tonal whiplash? Like, does highlighting the jarring, uncomfortable transition actually emphasize the surreal horror of the universe they inhabit?
It is genuinely hilarious that you think this writer is capable of doing something intentionally disruptive. That is a highly sophisticated editorial choice. Using the structure of the essay to mimic the broken reality of the subject matter can absolutely work if you actually know how to write.
Well, obviously, if a writer wants to use tonal whiplash intentionally, they have to actively signal that intent to the reader. They cannot just let the text crash into itself and hope the reader assumes it was on purpose.
Right. They need to provide a metatextual cue. Otherwise, it doesn't read as avant-garde commentary, it just reads as bad editing, which in this case it clearly is.
Obviously. So, to quickly recap this agonizingly basic critique, we need to restructure thematically, we need to deepen the analysis of the political satire so it's not just a list of coincidences, and we need to integrate the comedic elements as a thematic foil.
Yes, summarize the actionable suggestions so they can't mess it up. Grouping under broader headings, analyzing the why of the satire, tying subplots to the main theme. None of this is rocket science.
Right. So, revise your material and submit it back to the critique for further review. Hopefully the next draft won't be such a miserable assault on my patience.
Don't hold your breath.